Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Hesley, and I want to thank you all in advance for participating in this month's TalentQuest webinar. If you aren't already aware, we are providing complimentary webinars on a monthly basis that will feature a variety of talent management topics. The topic of today's webinar is using goals as a tool for enhancing employee engagement and satisfaction. Our two presenters are Dr. MySha Whorley, a talent management consultant, and Rachel Finglass, our Chief Relationship Officer. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that we have muted the phone lines. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the question and answer box at the bottom right-hand corner of your online webinar screen. At the end of the presentation, we will be gathering the questions and answer any of them that come through the webinar. So at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Whorley to get started.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Like Megan mentioned, we're going to be talking today about using goals as a tool for enhancing employee engagement. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about what engagement is. We'll spend some time defining employee engagement and making the business case for focusing on engagement. Then we'll discuss SMART goals, what they are, how to construct one, and the difference between performance goals and development goals. Finally, we'll spend some time digging into goals as a tool for engagement, and we'll map the use of SMART goals onto our conceptual map of employee engagement. And along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So there are a lot of definitions out there of employee engagement. We've listed some of those below. You can see some commonalities across these different definitions. For one, there's an emphasis on commitment or full involvement in your work. And there's also a suggestion in each of these of some sort of emotional element. So satisfaction, fulfillment, contentment. There's something deeper when an employee is engaged than just showing up to work for a paycheck. You can also see as a common element in some of these definitions and some of the others that you'll see if you do a search on this term, the inclusion of a performance element. So engaged employees are not only happy and committed and deeply satisfied, but they're also productive. So there's more to it than just the emotional involvement. There's an element of productivity or investment in a quality work product as well. So why is engagement such a hot topic right now? How does this impact your organizations? There's a lot of research out there about the impact of engagement on business. Engaged employees outperform disengaged employees by at least 20 and up to 28%. In recent studies, we've also found that companies with high levels of engagement outperform the total stock market index and have shareholder returns that are about 22% higher than average. In addition, better retention means not only lower turnover, but a larger pool of talent to draw from in your organization and better financial results overall. So just to stop there too and add a couple of notes about turnover, by conservative estimates, even the most conservative estimates, businesses lose about $11 billion a year collectively due to turnover. And the hard costs of replacing even a lower level employee are about 1.5 times their annual salary. And that number only goes up as the level of the job goes up and as the complexity of the work they're performing goes up. So, when you think about, those are some of the harder costs, but when you think about things like lost historical knowledge, decreased innovation, and lower morale amongst employees who remain at the organization, those all add to some of the hidden costs of turnover. So employee engagement really is, it's not just an HR soft topic issue, it really is a critical business issue. The other thing is, as the economy starts to turn around and bounce back, employees are going to begin to evaluate the work they're doing at your company. They're going to begin to evaluate their current role, and they're going to start looking for what else is out there and how the skills that they've acquired throughout the economic downturn can be used to either improve their position or increase the challenge or excitement in the work they do. So it's important to keep the employees that you have, that you've spent time training, happy and engaged in their work at your organization. So there are a lot of models of employee engagement out there. This is another thing. If you Google employee engagement, you'll get pages and pages worth of models and definitions. Each has their own sort of drivers of engagement. There's a model from the Dale Carnegie Institute. There's one from the Aon Hewitt Group. A lot of you are probably familiar with the Gallup Q12, which was the basis for the book First Break All the Rules. That's just a few of the models that are out there. But what we've put together here, we've sort of pulled from some of those and used a model that we found, a different model that we found that captures some of the more common drivers of employee engagement. So we've listed 5 of those here. We're just going to go through this model and sort of outline what are some of the things that drive employee engagement up in an organization. So two-way feedback is the idea that communication comes not only down from management, but is also accepted reciprocally back up the chain from employees. This is one of the most important drivers of employee engagement, but oftentimes mechanisms for this kind of communication are often missing in organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how goal setting can become a mechanism for communicating reciprocally. You giving feedback to your employees and your employees feeding that feedback back up the chain. Research has shown that engagement levels rise when there is a formal career development system in place. So that includes career pathing, obvious opportunities for advancement, so not just those opportunities that are hidden within the organization, but the ones that people really can see, that they can recognize this is an opportunity for me to advance. And regular conversations about career trajectory. So when you're talking with your employees as a manager about where's your career going, what are you preparing yourself for, and how are we going to get you ready to move into that next position. It makes sense that folks would be more engaged with their workplace if the people they work with are having discussions with them about a future there. Another critical driver of engagement is the understanding for employees of the big picture in the organization. So where the company is going and how their role in the work that they do on an everyday basis fits in to the overall landscape of the work that the organization is doing, but also into the success that the organization is experiencing or plans to experience. Another driver, when we talk about shared decision making, participation in decisions, particularly those that concern their jobs, is critical for maintaining engagement. So one of the close relatives of engagement is empowerment. And when you think about employees at the lowest levels of organizations, they need to be empowered to affect the decisions that impact their work. We can also think of accountability here. If an employee participates in setting the goal, they're a lot more likely to hold themselves personally accountable for actually achieving that goal. And finally, trust in leadership is a strong driver of engagement, and it's linked to leadership sort of following through on the commitments they make to employees and communicating with transparency the direction of the organization. So again, people are going to be much more likely to have a sense of team when they're informed about where they're going and they trust the people that are leading them there. So these 5 drivers will serve as the basis for our discussion of goal setting and its role in improving engagement. So let's talk a little bit about goals. Why are we touting goals as a tool for engagement specifically? There are a lot of ways to engage your employees. So why are we talking about goals? There are 3 reasons. We'll get into the weeds a little bit here in a moment, but as an overview, if done well, the goal setting process gives employees face time with their managers on a regular basis. This face time enables ongoing feedback and adjustment of the employee's goals and provides a snapshot of the organization at a given moment. So whenever you sit down to set goals with your employees as a manager, or if you're the employee setting the goals, it gives you a chance to explore where the company is at that moment and how those goals can tie in to where the company is and where the company's going. So if you're setting performance goals, you can see where am I, where's the company at this point in time, and if you're cascading goals, which means tying those individual goals to department goals up to organizational goals, this gives a really nice chance to see sort of the common thread. Active decision making is a chance also for the employee and the manager to really sit down and think actively about that person's job and what are the appropriate metrics for success. So it's nice when the person who's being asked to perform the job is involved in determining how am I going to be measured? What metrics are going to be used to evaluate my success in my role? And that's a very engaging process. Setting goals also puts a person in charge of their success and makes them feel much more ownership over their work process than if the goals are handed down or if no goals are set at all. And just to clarify here too, we're talking about goal setting as an ongoing work process, not as a one-time discrete event. If goal setting is to be most effective, it's going to be something that is iterative, that allows for feedback and resetting of goals and evaluation and review. It's most effective if it's culturally driven and it's ongoing. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between these two types of goals. We got performance goals and developmental goals, and each of them fosters employee engagement in different ways. Performance goals are those that are measured against the performance expectations of your job role. So these are goals set regarding your workload and how much you're expected to accomplish in a given year or whatever your time increment is, whether you set it quarterly or semi-annually. Whereas developmental goals are those goals that are set to make you a more well-rounded employee. So these may include goals related to stretch assignments and other skills or professional development targets. Oftentimes these goals are not appropriate to be used in a performance appraisal. These are more outside of the range of evaluating a person's work performance and really sort of to make them a more fully developed employee. So as you can imagine, these goals engage employees in very different ways. And we can go back to our model a little bit for an illustration. So when you think about performance goals, our model says that when employees know how they contribute to the overall success of the organization, they're more engaged. Setting job-related goals that correspond to the goals set at the departmental and organizational level, in other words, sort of the cascading goals, is one way to really ensure engagement. So people know when I get this project done, it helps my department keep its costs down, which helps my organization maximize its profit, meet its profit targets. Shared decision-making empowers employees who know that they have the support and buy-in from their managers to set their own course. And setting performance goals also allows that two-way feedback that we talked about. So you get to see how you've progressed in your career since the last time those performance goals were assessed, which enhances motivation going forward to continue to meet those goals and to push yourself a little bit. As far as developmental goals, they tap into different engagement drivers. So when developmental goals are set and resources are actually spent on an employee on things like training and development to help them achieve those goals, it deepens the commitment and engagement. It allows the employee to see that the organization is behind them and is actually willing to invest in them in some way, and not just invest to increase their own profits, but invest in their people for the sake of investing in their people. And employees are a lot more likely to stick around and to work hard in their current organization if they see that they're being given skills to advance or to maybe enter a specialty career track. All right, so we're going to take a little break from our conceptual framework here to make this a little more concrete. We're going to give you a snapshot of how this organizational goal setting can actually be automated and give you a little demonstration. Turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, and this is Rachel Finglass speaking, and let me just switch our view now for just a moment and take a look now. We're going to take a look, as MySha said, to a little more nuts and bolts. How do we get it done? And, you know, I hear the question regularly, okay, conceptually this makes sense. I get it. I'm excited about it. But you know what? I'm supporting a sizable organization here. How do I make it happen? And of course, that's where technology is such a help and such a joy. So when I'm logged into TalentQuest now, I'm going to show you just quickly one example of how we could get this done. There's certainly lots of variations and lots of examples. But I want to take this and tie it back to much of what Dr. Whorley was telling us. So she talked a lot about the value of shared decision making, about two-way feedback. So part of what could enable that to happen would be a process that involves the individual who's receiving the goals as well as his or her manager. It could be a discussion between the two individuals, deciding upon the goals, having the individual own them and take accountability and put them in a system that can help track them, and let a manager go through a process of editing or approving those. This will help in the shared decision making. They can be included at review time for some two-way feedback with the individual and the manager, as well as help improve that trust in leadership. So what I'm going to show you now is a workflow that was set up where this individual, as you see Chloe Roberts, has the opportunity to set goals that are both performance goals as well as developmental goals. Now, Chloe has one goal that she has put in here already, and we can see that goal very clearly to increase customer satisfaction survey ratings by 20%. Now, Chloe is talked with her manager about this. She also understands very importantly how this individual goal of hers is mapping up to the success of her department and ultimately the organization, because she had the opportunity to map her individual goal to one of those departmental goals. The other thing is that this goal is time-bound. Chloe knows during what time frame she needs to achieve it and exactly what are the specific details of this goal. And Dr. Whorley will speak more about this later in terms of how to make sure that these are good goals and how this is going to drive employee engagement. The other very important part of this process is that it's not a one-time event, but as we were talking about, that it is ongoing and part of our culture and part of ongoing conversations. And along those lines, Chloe and her manager can come in and put in activity, things that are getting Chloe closer towards achieving this goal and tracking that goal achievement, so that at any point throughout the performance year, they can see where is Chloe in terms of achieving these goals, whether they be performance goals and or developmental goals. Now, where some of the real value will occur, of course, will be for the organization. So that's additional value where the organization can also begin to leverage technology and report on, okay, what are all the goals in this particular division? What goals are mapping up to which one of our division goals? How far are we as a division towards achieving that division goal? And make sure that everyone is staying on track so that at the end of the year, throughout the year, we know where we are towards achieving those goals. Now, Chloe is also a manager of others, and as we talked about, has that capability to not only put in her own goals, but also approve the goals of those that work for her, reject them, add more, or make changes to those. So as you can see, it takes conceptually what Dr. Whorley has been talking about, puts technology behind it so that we have reminders, we have times throughout the year that we can continue to receive reminders, go in and track progress, so that this becomes no longer any sort of administrative burden, but instead we're focusing on the powerful benefits that have been discussed. So I'm going to hand the microphone now back to Dr. Whorley to continue talking us through more about this.
Okay. All right, so as you can see, that's just one way that you can sort of learn to automate this process in your organization. But it's important that you develop some way to do that, because otherwise it becomes sort of an administrative nightmare trying to keep track of everyone's goals, and whether you've, as a manager, whether you've signed off on those goals and whether you agree with those goals and how those goals map on, and whether you've really talked through the process for reviewing them and evaluating achievement. All of those things, it can be difficult even for the most organized person to keep track of all of that, particularly as your number of direct reports goes up. So it's important to have some way of automating that process in your organization. So let's talk a little bit about SMART goals. The moment has finally arrived. We've had this acronym up throughout the slide presentation and in the webinar announcement. So we'll talk a little bit about this acronym. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about SMART goals and probably know what it stands for, but I think it's important enough to spend a little bit of time on here, because goals that are set up that aren't SMART are sometimes worse than setting up no goals at all, because you give a person a sense that they have a goal they can shoot for and try to accomplish, when really they're doomed from the get-go if they haven't set the goal up appropriately. So SMART goals, first and foremost, need to be specific. So when we're talking about specificity, we're talking about delineating what the outcomes are that we're anticipating or hoping for. So what do we plan to deliver? What's the deliverable of the goal? What's the ultimate measure? How are we going to know when this goal is actually achieved? And I think what's important about the specific piece is that it needs to be agreed upon by the employee and the manager. So at the outset of goal setting, there need to be enough specifics that if the two individuals were sitting in separate rooms evaluating whether this goal had been achieved, that they would both come to the same conclusion at the end of the goal achievement. So there needs to be very little room for interpretation or subjective evaluation of the goal. It needs to be clear, and you need to understand exactly what's being expected of you. The goal also needs to be measurable. So you need to have some ruler that's decided on in advance, some way to objectively assess whether the goal has been achieved. And that needs to be predetermined. So your ruler shouldn't be changing every time you come back to set the goal. Now that doesn't preclude revisiting your ruler and saying, if you're setting up a new goal process, that's why it's an iterative process and there's a little bit of back and forth. Because sometimes you think you have the right metric and then you determine that you don't. And so when you're setting up a new process, it's fine to spend some time tinkering with your metrics. But once you've set a goal and you're expecting someone to achieve it, there really needs to be an objective way to assess, whether it's a rating, whether it's an observation, whatever it is, the person needs to know up front how it's going to be assessed, and they need to be able to see, they can look at that ruler and determine whether they're actually meeting that goal before an outside party looks. The goal should be attainable or achievable, which means that the employee has the access to the resources to actually achieve the goal. So they have the time, they have the people around that they need, they have the information, they have the data, they have the equipment. Whatever it is in your organization that the person's going to need to reach that goal, they need to have access to that stuff. And they shouldn't have to jump through 2 or 3 hurdles or go through 2 or 3 people or have a lot of gatekeepers in between them and the access to those resources. Because again, that's a demotivator. If someone's trying to work on a goal, they should be able to easily access the resources they need. The goal needs to be relevant. So it has to be related to the work that they're actually doing. And specifically, it's best if the goal aligns with departmental goals, team goals, organizational goals, other important metrics in the organization. So if a person is over there achieving, but it's not related to anything critical in the organization, eventually they're going to figure out, well, why am I spending all my time on this when this report always gets buried every month? I spend, 3 full days of my work month working on this report, and then people put it on a shelf. It's a demotivator not to have some link to other things that are important in the organization. And finally, for a goal to be SMART, it needs to be timely or time-bound. So it needs to have some scheduled time frame, either the end of quarter 1, the end of the month, the end of the week, the end of the year. There needs to be a delivery date so they know this is the date when I'm going to be evaluated on having met this goal or not. So let's walk through an example here. So let's say someone's broad goal is to develop proficiency in Microsoft Office Suite. And this is not terribly unimaginable that someone could have this as a goal. But is this a SMART goal? No, for a lot of reasons. Timely is already up there. This is not a time-bound goal. There's no parameters on when this person is to have developed this proficiency. Is it specific? No. What exactly does proficiency mean? So for a goal to be specific and measurable, the terms have to be defined. So proficiency in one of the applications in the suite, proficiency across the whole suite, proficiency meaning I can open a document and type a word into it, or proficiency meaning I have to set up complex formulas in Microsoft Excel. Is it measurable? Not particularly. Again, the term proficiency isn't defined. There's no 2 people could read this goal in very different ways and both feel like they had achieved it. Is it attainable? Yes. You can see someone having developed proficiency in Microsoft Office Suite. And is it relevant? Probably. Being proficient in the suite is going to be relevant to most people's office job. But when we think about a SMART goal, we want to put all these parameters around it. So achieve ability to format slides, font, and animation in Microsoft PowerPoint by March 31st. So this is going to be a goal that's much smarter. It's got a time, it's got specifics, you know exactly what it is you're expected to do, and two people reading it are probably going to come to about the same conclusion. So we've included some side-by-sides here. These are just additional examples of taking a broad goal, and I call them dumb, just sort of superlatively here, but taking a goal that's broad and making it much more specific so that two different people would be reading the exact same metrics. So rather than just increase customer satisfaction, which could mean anything, if it goes from 10% to 11%, that's an increase. But is that going to be a critical metric in most organizations? Probably not. But if you said to increase customer satisfaction survey ratings by 20%, you know exactly what the metric is you're looking at, you know exactly what the measurement is, and you've got Q1, so quarter one in 2013. So you know at which point you're going to be evaluated on whether you've achieved this goal. And you can see similarly for improved sales and boost employee morale. So you want to reduce sick call-outs. And I put that one on there because boosting employee morale is a difficult thing to measure. And one way to measure it is to maybe say people call out less. So they're happier, they actually want to come to work. But honestly, you could define and measure employee morale in a multitude of ways. So it's not really important what your metric is, but it's important that you have a metric and that it's defined and that you don't have broad goals hanging out here that everyone's interpreting in a different way in your organization. So SMART goal setting is deceptively simple, and it can be much more of an art than a science when you sit down to actually set these goals. So we've included here some additional questions you can ask yourself to test sort of the smartness of the goals you set. The first question is, what resources are needed to reach this goal, and how might they change over the lifespan of the goal? So you need to ask yourself, if you're someone's manager, what people, what information, what time, what processes does this employee need access to in order to reach this goal? And keep in mind that these may change. That there are certain goals that when you, at the outset of the goal, there may be different resources you need to get started than there are when you're sort of in the home stretch, or once a process is well underway, you may need access to different things. How best can I track my goal? So there's no point in setting up a goal that you have no good way to track. You don't know from one day to the next whether you're closer or further away from actually reaching your goal. So your tracking system should be something that's simple, it should be accurate, and it should be built in somehow to your everyday routine. So we shouldn't have to enter into complex analytics in order to determine whether we've met our goal or not. It should be something that we can track every day, we can readily have access to where we are, and that we know easily whether we're on the way to achieving that goal or not. It should be accessible to not only the employee but the manager. There's no better way to set yourself up for success in achieving a big goal either than to achieve some mini goals along the way. So kind of that low-hanging fruit, or those early wins. Figure out the smallest possible step on the way to the goal and make that the first mini goal. It's really important, I think, to have an opportunity to see yourself successful, and that gives you the motivation to continue on. Especially the bigger the goal, the more mini goals you should have along the way. That way you get an opportunity to reward yourself too. Which leads to the next question. What rewards will be received? And again, from the employee perspective, how can I reward myself? And from the manager's perspective, what rewards do I have the opportunity to give my employees for achieving their goals? Sometimes we don't have access to raises or bonuses or financial incentives. But can you give the person a day to work from home? Can you give them a special seat at the table, a parking spot? You know, you think small and think big about rewards that you can use to motivate your employees. There are as many ways to define rewards as there are people. Anything you might receive that makes you more likely to achieve your goals is a reward. So that depends a lot on the culture, what's really valued. It could be a promotion, it could be a stretch assignment that's sought after. You know, a trophy from the local trophy shop, you name it, it can be anything. So these are some questions, again, to sort of optimize your SMART goals and to think through and make sure that they're really, to give it a deeper layer of thought besides just the SMART acronym. All right, so anytime you want to start a goal-setting process in your organization, you want to be thinking through a couple of things. I mentioned earlier that goal setting is an ongoing and iterative process, so it should occur regularly, and it really should be woven into business as usual. It shouldn't be a whole day out, this is goal-setting day, and then everyone goes back to their regular jobs and forgets all about it. To the extent that you can create a culture of not only goal setting, but goal evaluation, goal review, and goal feedback, you'll maximize the engagement of your employees, particularly their engagement with the goal-setting process. Another thing to keep in mind is that the best way to keep your goals integrated into your work is to automate the process, like we mentioned earlier. Using a system like what we've demonstrated here is one way to ensure that goal setting is reviewed at regular intervals. You can set up reminders. There's some outside force that's reminding you to set these goals and to review these goals, so you don't always have to build it into your process. And the key stakeholders need to be compelled to come together to have these conversations. So this is not something that the employee does in isolation. The manager has to put the time behind it to actually meet and have the conversations around these goals and around their achievement and around what sort of level of recognition is going to be afforded to people when they achieve the goals they've set. And finally, follow-through is critical. Like I think I mentioned earlier, it's almost worse to start a goal-setting process with employees if you don't plan to put any resources behind the process. That's a surefire motivation killer. I'm sure we've all been victim to some major change process in an organization that was touted and then disappears into the mist, and we've invested time and energy only to realize that nothing fruitful was really going to come of it. So it's frustrating and it's demotivating for employees to have a goal-setting process that then has no resources to ensure success. So follow through on the goal setting. That's important. So finally, we've included here some things for you to consider in your organization as you're developing a goal-setting process. Some questions to ask yourself. Do you currently have a culture of goal setting and evaluation? How do the employees perceive that process? What kinds of goals do you set in your organization, and who sets them? Are all the goals delivered from on high and you're just supposed to adopt them into your work process, or are the employees themselves actively engaged? Do individual and departmental goals map onto organizational goals? And what process is used to ensure that goal setting actually takes place? Is there a level of accountability around the goal setting process? Is it automated? If so, how, and does that work? Is it a system that everyone's familiar with, that everyone's comfortable using? Does it need a high level of training, or can anyone all the way down to the entry-level person use the system? Are resources put behind the goals, and are the goals reviewed? And how are they used in the organization? Is anything tied to their accomplishment? So these are some additional questions you can ask to really consider when you're setting up a goal-setting process. How do I make that tangible for people and really effective?
Okay, let's take a few minutes for questions if we've got some time, if y'all have any questions. I do see one here that we can go ahead and address, and y'all go ahead and type in any others, and they should come through to us. So let's start with this one. What if I have an employee who wants to set goals that I do not feel are challenging enough? How do I handle that?
I think that's a good question. I think that's part of the reason why it's important to come together as a manager and an employee to have these kinds of conversations. Because if you're sending people off to set their own goals, there's no checks and balances to ensure that the goals actually are relevant. So the first step is to have an opportunity to look at the goals and have input as a manager, and to be able to say, well, that's a good starting point, but how can we tie this back to what our team is doing, or how can we tie this back to what our department is doing? And I think a lot of times employees set goals that don't seem relevant because they're not privy to the information to set a relevant goal. They don't necessarily know what their department is doing, or they don't necessarily know what the organizational goals are. So how do they set a goal that's relevant or can be tied to those if they don't know what they are? So I think, it really underscores the critical element of having the meetings, of coming together to really talk through what is relevant and how does your role contribute to our overall success.
Thank you. Here's one more, always a good one, is what if I have an employee working for me who is already performing well? Should we still set goals, or how do we set goals?
And I'm sure that most of you know that the answer to that is absolutely. Everyone should always have goals. Here at TalentQuest, we work under a continuous improvement model. So I don't care whether you're fresh out of college or whether you've been the CEO of a Fortune 500 company for your entire career. There's always room for improvement. And again, I think this goes back to tying those goals to relevant organizational metrics. Every year, most successful organizations set some sort of targets for themselves. And those targets can fall into a range of categories. Some of them are profit targets. Some of them are customer service targets. All sorts of, types of goal categories. So if the organization has goals, which often then sort of cascade down to departmental goals, there's no reason why each individual in a department shouldn't have some goal that is a part of that shared success. And so helping them recognize, how can I stretch myself? Maybe they are proficient in their current job, but do they want to move up to the next level? Do they want more variety? Do they want to develop sort of a niche area? Whatever it is that's their own personal motivator can be used to develop a goal. It's a good question.
I've got another one here. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble being able to view all this. What? So it's a question about the frequency for setting SMART goals, I think. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. Give me one more second, this one.
Well, I guess I can start to answer that question a little bit. That depends. It really should be tied to whatever the metric is. And it should also be tied a little bit to how your organization sets goals. If there's a goal-setting process already in place in your organization, even from the highest level, then you can sort of map the timing onto that. If your organization sets goals quarterly, then you can cascade that all the way down to the individual level. I recommend that they be set more often than just annually. A lot of people have an annual performance review, and they use that time to set goals for the next year. But a year is a long time. And 6 months, 8 months, for me, sometimes even 3 months down the road, I don't even remember what the conversation was around the goals that we talked about. So I think it's important for them to be frequent enough that you have some miniature milestones along the way, and that the goals can really be updated and assessed and reevaluated, because you don't want to wait until 12 months later to realize that a person didn't have the resources to reach a goal, or that the goal was unrealistic in the first place. You want to be able to do that soon after the goal is set.
Okay, we've got another one here. This is from an organization where setting goals are completely new across the entire company. What's the best way to train or coach regarding goal setting, particularly without the process becoming overwhelming?
Mm-hmm. I think, again, number one, it's important to have some way of automating the process, of showing people how they can incorporate this into their everyday workload without it being a whole new work responsibility. So that's going to be important. I think also really tying the goal-setting process to people's motivations and aspirations is a good way to gain buy-in right up front. What do you want to... Starting to have the conversation, what do you want to do in your career? Where do you want to go from here? What are your goals you already have? Because most people have goals anyway. They just aren't articulated, or they aren't fleshed out, or they aren't discussed with their manager. But if you ask most people, where do you want to be in 5 years, they can give you an answer. So starting off by helping people recognize the benefits of setting goals, and certainly the benefits of setting shared goals, that you and your manager can really come together, so your manager can put, or you as a manager can actually put the resources behind it. If they're setting their goals in isolation and they want to move to the next level, but no one's ever heard that they have aspirations for the next rung of leadership, then there aren't any resources available to them. So I think that's one way to start. And then, to just, I think, start from the top down. As a manager, have some goals and show how that process can help you achieve your career goals is a good place to start.
Okay, these were great questions, and I appreciate everybody's participation. Did want to say, if we didn't fully answer your question, or if you have any additional ones as you hang up and you're processing, feel free to contact any of us here at TalentQuest. Of course, the kind of general support email address, if you need, is info@talentquest.com, and we'll make sure that any questions get forwarded on to the right person for an answer. So with that, it looks like there's no more questions. I appreciate everybody's participation, like I said, and look forward to having everyone on our next webinar in a month.
Thank you very much.